have with us Joel Minden. He is a clinical psychologist specializing in cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety and related disorders. He's also the author of Show Your Anxiety, Who's the Boss, as well as the director of Chico Center for Cognitive Behavior Therapy. Further, he's also an adjunct faculty at California State University in Chico.
One of the things I want to talk about today is the problem of avoidance. And so sometimes the things that we do to try to cope with difficult emotions can create a lot of problems, even though it might seem reasonable enough in those moments when we're struggling emotionally, because we might do certain things where we avoid situations that are really important, because we don't know that we're going to be able to cope, or we won't be able to tolerate some of the difficult emotions that will come up. Or we might try to avoid the thoughts that are related to difficult emotions, or we try to avoid the emotions themselves with various coping strategies. And I think long term, it's really important for all of us to find productive ways to work through difficult emotions so that ultimately we can really prioritize action, we can prioritize living our lives, we can make choices on our own terms without worrying so much about the emotional challenges that we face, and without letting emotions drive what we do. So that's the focus of my talk. So action, not avoidance. So CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, there are really three things that I think are important to consider here, and we really try to simplify the process of understanding the human experience. And so in cognitive behavioral therapy, we're going to look at three types of experiences. And so one would be, let's see if I can, there we go. One would be cognition, right? So as the name cognitive behavioral therapy would suggest, cognition, the cognitive element or the prong would refer to how we think or what we think. So the content of our thoughts. And so here we're looking at beliefs and attitudes and assumptions. It's what we think. So very interested in these cognitive processes. This is really important for understanding not just what we think or how we think, but also for understanding. And then finally, in CBT, we think about behavior, the behavioral element of the human experience, and that's what we do. And so when we're thinking about CBT, we want to look at the interplay. How do all of these elements relate? So let's say, for example, if we're kind of thinking about application of these concepts. So most of you are students, those of you who are viewing this right now. And so if you're a student, let's say, for example, you have an upcoming project or an exam or something like that, and you might anticipate this upcoming challenge, and you might think, I'm not prepared for this, I'm not going to do well, it's going to be really difficult. And if you have these future-oriented concerns, if you have these beliefs about the future that something's going to be bad and you won't be able to cope, you won't be able to handle it, then you're probably going to have an emotional reaction, and it's probably going to be anxiety. Because whenever we have this belief that something bad will happen in the future, our bodies prepare us to take action in some sort of way, either to defend ourselves, to protect, or play it safe in some way. So collectively, when we have those experiences that are often, I guess the most noticeable experiences that we have are physical, we might look at all of that along with the thoughts, the predictions that something bad will happen, and we describe that emotion as anxiety. So we predict the bad event, we have the emotional response of anxiety, and then, of course, the behavioral response that might follow is often avoidance. So if we think something bad will happen, we feel anxious, we might avoid the situation that's anxiety provoking. And so that might result in procrastination, not doing the work, not engaging in the process of completing a project. And then, of course, that might provide a little bit of temporary relief from the anxiety, but ultimately that project is still there. We have to get to it. We have to face it at a certain point. Maybe you're biased, they're distorted, they're just not quite accurate. So we want to be aware of the thinking traps that pop up for us. And there's so many of them, but I just want to point out a few that might be useful for those of you watching to be aware of. One is all or nothing thinking. And here's where we're kind of taking our experiences, the way we understand ourselves or other people or the future. We kind of think about things in sort of a dichotomous way, in these categories that are either it's this thing or it's that thing. It can't be anything in between. So some examples would be, statements like, or beliefs like, I can't do this job. Think about the issues that come up with, or that come up if you think that way. I can't do this job. If you really believe that, either I can or I can't, if you believe you can't, then you've already made up your mind, right? I'm not going to be able to do it. I shouldn't even try. And you're probably going to feel, depressed or something like that, and then behaviorally be really passive. So it's so limiting when you get stuck on these rigid beliefs, these ideas that are, they're inflexible, they're categorical in this way, all or nothing. It really limits your opportunities for emotional responding, for behavior change, and for growth and movement. So we want to be careful about thinking in these terms. Another is, I'm a failure, right? I'm a success or I'm a failure. And so let's say somebody is, things are going pretty well, and then they have a couple setbacks. They might say, yep, I'm a failure. Which is probably not a very realistic belief, but when we're not feeling good, sometimes we really do get stuck on these ideas that aren't quite accurate. Or thinking about another person, you don't care about me. Either you do or you don't, right? And so if you think you don't, then how is the other person supposed to maneuver, right, if you're really invested in that belief? So lots of pitfalls here. Got to be careful about those all or nothing ways of thinking. Another type of thought trap or thinking trap we want to be careful about is catastrophizing. And here's where, with anxiety, we might start to have certain beliefs about the future. We think the future is going to be catastrophic in some way. So let's say you're taking a class and you get a bad grade on something, you might make the prediction, I'm going to fail the class. Right, that would be the worst possible outcome. That may happen, it may not, but if you're so locked into the worst thing that'll happen, again, it really makes it hard to maneuver. And so you might have intense anxiety, and you might think, I better just drop the class. I better avoid anything that's going to make me feel uncomfortable or lead to this catastrophic outcome. Let's say you notice your heart's beating fast. I have heart disease, right? Well, that would be a bad outcome. But again, probably overstating the likelihood that something really, really bad is going to happen. Maybe not considering the possibility that, something else is going on, that maybe it's not a big deal. So really getting stuck on that worst case scenario is what we see with catastrophizing. Or if you're, let's say you're not thinking clearly one day, you're having trouble getting your thoughts together, or just mentally you're struggling with memory or whatever. Maybe life is stressful at the time, who knows, but you might think I'm going crazy. Again, kind of a worst case scenario. We got to be careful about that. It's really going to exacerbate anxiety and probably create more avoidance. Overgeneralization is where we might look at a little bit of information. We might have a little bit of data from our experiences in life and use a small bit of information, a few experiences, and then kind of generalize that information to our entire lives. It leads to this, it's sort of this global universal thinking. One way to detect overgeneralization is when we use language like always, never, everybody, nobody, nothing. So I'm always messing up, right? Probably not true, right? I mess up sometimes, it's more than I would like to. I mess up in certain areas of my life, not always, not in every situation. Everything is boring. I hear this a lot when people are depressed. Everything is boring. Well, that makes it really tough, right, to get out of a depressed state if you really believe that. So another belief might be something like, a lot of things that I think about seem boring. Maybe if I try to do some of the things I've enjoyed in the past, maybe I'll enjoy them and it's worth it to try, right? So that seems pretty realistic. Nobody listens to me, right? Understandable that somebody would be pretty angry or pretty frustrated if they really believe that nobody's listening. So hopefully you get the point, right? All of these are very rigid ways of thinking. They really get in our way if we get stuck on these ideas. And so we want to give ourselves an opportunity to think in different ways that are going to be more useful for us long term. By the way, I just want to say these thinking traps, we all do it, right? We all get stuck on these ideas, and and so be patient with yourself, understand that you're going to do it. It's a very efficient way of thinking, right? Either I'm good or I'm bad, right? It's always like this. It's an easy way of thinking. We do it because it's efficient, but I think if we're aware of it, that gives us an opportunity to respond to it in helpful ways. So avoidance, right? Kind of the greatest hits of avoidance. These are the thoughts that come up so much for people when they do struggle with avoidance. So we'll look at kind of a belief on one side and then a helpful comeback on the other side. Let's say you have, I hear this one a lot, I'll do it, right? Something important, right? I have this important thing to do. I'll do it when I'm feeling better, right? Like we're waiting for that magic moment where everything feels so good that we can finally tackle a difficult project. Come back to that might be, I can work through the difficult emotions. I don't need to wait until I'm feeling better. I can try to do it now, or I can do it anyway, even if I'm not feeling 100%. I have to calm down first, right? Another come back to that might be, I don't have to. I can tolerate the discomfort and, I'll see how it goes. I just want to get rid of this feeling, right? Of course, right? But a comeback might be, well, it's okay to have feelings. You may not like it. Maybe you don't want to feel that way, but you have it. It's there in front of you. It's something you're dealing with, and that's okay. It's okay to have an emotional reaction. I can't concentrate, function, or cope, right? The comeback might be, yeah, I can still function when I'm upset. And then the last one, I like this one a lot, right? With avoidance behavior. Let's say, you you're not doing your work, you're avoiding social activities, you're relying on these safety behaviors to try to calm the emotions. And you might say, this helps me, right? It's good for me to commit to this avoidance behavior. But the problem, as I said before, is we get a little bit of relief. It's short term. It's, it doesn't have a big impact. And long term, we become really committed to those safety behaviors, to those tactics, which isn't helpful. So I like to sort of remind myself, and this is something I say a lot to clients, remember short-term gain, long-term pain. Feels good in the moment, but long-term, you really don't learn how to work through the difficult emotions, which is so important. So let's talk about, the first thing that you can do, right? That might be a little different. Realistic and useful thinking. So we already know about the dangers of this sort of biased, distorted, destructive patterns of thinking. Let's think about realistic and useful thinking. So first of all, I encourage people to start out by being really specific about their thoughts, because often, when we have these thoughts related to the emotions, they're not specific. They're really, kind of generalized, like, oh, something awful is going to happen. I can just feel it. Well, that's not very specific. We want to kind of pinpoint the problem. So I find it really helpful to be specific, write down your concerns, really take a look at them. What's going through my mind? Look at them on paper. And it's also helpful to get them out of your mind and onto paper so you don't keep kicking them around mentally. You can just say, they're on the paper. If it's really that important, I can revisit this information later, but let me just get it out and then I can really look at my thinking. Write down your concerns, see if you can refine the ideas, right? So what is this bad thing that I think is going to happen? Will it be a practical setback? Will it be that my anxiety will spike and I don't know if I can handle that? Will it be that I'll be so distracted by my thoughts that I won't be able to focus on anything else? Be really specific, right? Because then you have an opportunity to deal with that potential problem. If you're not specific, it's going to seem like an overwhelming impossibility. And if you have lots of different concerns, rank them. Pick 2 or 3 that are most important to address, and then figure out where to go from there. Then for realistic thinking, you can ask yourself some questions, right? So if you have a thought about, something bad, let's say you're judging yourself in a harsh way. So for example, suppose, you're struggling in a relationship, right? And you think, I'm unlovable. Nobody could love me. So how realistic is that belief? So you might ask yourself, well, how do I know this? What's the evidence, right? How do I know this for sure? Is it because in this one relationship I'm having some problems? Is that the case for all of the relationships in my life? Have I ever had, an experience that goes against my belief, that suggests that maybe my thinking isn't quite accurate? So how do you know? What's the evidence for the belief? What's the evidence against? You might also kind of reflect on your personal history. What's happened, right, that drives that thinking? Have you had certain setbacks, certain experiences that have influenced that way of thinking? Maybe you're dealing with an upcoming situation that might be difficult. What is known about that situation and what's unknown? And am I having a more difficult time with what I know or what I don't know? Is it the uncertainty that's really difficult here? You might ask yourself when you're making a prediction that something catastrophic will happen, you can also ask yourself, well, what's the best thing that might happen, right? And here's where we have to be careful about the so-called positive thinking. So the best, the most like, or sorry, the best, the worst, and then finally kind of that middle ground. What's the most likely outcome? What do I think is most likely to happen here? And then finally ask yourself if there are other possibilities. What you believe may not be accurate. There may be other ways of looking at yourself, the situation, other people that might be more reasonable. So give yourself a chance to think about other possibilities. Finally, we want to think about useful thinking. So it's possible, right, that your thinking is accurate. Let's say you got fired from a job, right? And you're thinking, yeah, it's going to be really hard for me to find another job. That might be true, right? So then the question is, what could you do? So here's where you might start to plan a little bit, right? I want to, start looking for jobs, and here's how I'm going to do it. This is my plan. I'm going to reach out to this person who might know somebody and get my resume together, right? So you can prepare yourself, you can take action, or at least get yourself ready for that. You might also remind yourself that useful thinking is going to fall into generally one of two categories. There's an opportunity for change, right? I can do something about this. And then there's an opportunity for acceptance. I really did lose my job and it's painful, and I have to accept that, right? That's something I'm just going to have to deal with for a little while. So that can be really helpful to, sorry, my cat. He's very active here. Talk about acceptance, right? I gotta tolerate this bad behavior from my cat. So that can be useful, right? To kind of acknowledge that I've got two general options here, and what do I think I should do? If you've got practical problems, right? Eliminate those obstacles. There are different things that you can do to try to prepare yourself for upcoming challenges, and if there's something getting in your way, fix it, address the problem, take these practical steps to make the situation better, and then plan for performance, right? What can you do to increase the likelihood that things go your way, that you get what you want, that you display behavior that you're really trying to display? And when you plan for success, when you give yourself an opportunity to do something well, and you do, right? You experience success, and it can be a really small win, a small change and improvement. That builds self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is just a belief about your effectiveness. It's about your capacity to do something that's really important. Let's take, for example, somebody who's depressed and they're quite sedentary. They sleep until noon every day. They might say, you know what, I really want to work on getting up. And, for me, it's a big deal to get out of bed by 10 a.m. And, if I just walk around the block, that's an improvement, right? I'm doing something. And so a lot of us might hear that and say, that's not a big deal, right? Anyone could do that, but a lot of people can't, right? If they're struggling with depression. So make a plan, right? Schedule it, figure out how you're going to do this, and then take those small steps, and that builds self-efficacy. The more you do it, the more you believe, hey, I can keep this going, that there's an opportunity to continue this and really build my effectiveness and feel better about what I'm doing.
Okay, so the next question is by Vanshika. In your presentation, you talked about how we tend to sort of avoid our emotions and sort of sweep them under the rug. We also tend to pick up on how to respond to our emotions often through our environment as children. So given that such ways of responding are so embedded in us, to what extent can we make changes to it? Like I have heard with dogs, and for training them, if there are dogs who are genetically emotionally reactive, then we cannot remove that behavior, or we cannot change the way in which we can only manage the behavior. We cannot eliminate a behavior in an emotionally reactive dog. Do you feel that it is that way with us as well?
What a great question. I think it's important to separate, right? We have the emotional reactions, right? And that's the stuff, right? So there are going to be, these are conditioned responses in many cases. And like you said, right, early experiences throughout our lives, we have, sort of events, that kind of lead to certain types of emotional reactions, certain ways of thinking, and it becomes almost automatic, almost like a reflex. And so these emotions, they just kind of occur. And so a lot of people, they want to change how they feel and how they think. And I think you're right that when these, kind of patterns of responding become kind of habitual, they start to become pretty fixed. And so I think this is such an important concept. Let's take anxiety, for example. Like when I was a little kid, there was in my neighborhood, there was a dog that was usually on a leash, and I was kind of fearful of dogs, but one day the dog was off the leash and the dog got really close to me, and it was a big dog and he was scary. And I had, that fear reaction. And because of that one experience, that one interaction with the dog, for years when I encountered dogs, I mean, to this day, right, I see dogs and, even little dogs, right, I hear them bark or they run toward me, I flinch. I have an emotional reaction. I think it's a learned response. I didn't get rid of that. I've been around a lot of dogs. I like dogs now, but I still have that emotional reaction. I still detect danger when I encounter a dog. And so I think it's really important to understand that when you've learned that way of thinking, that way of emotional responding, you've learned the avoidance urge, these are well-rehearsed responses. You don't control that. But here's the important element, right? What we do have control over is our response to it. So we can feel anxious. We can have certain thoughts that maybe aren't very rational. We can have these avoidance urges. But using the tactics that I've mentioned today, we have a comeback, right? We can say, no, this is what I want to remember about this. Here's another way of thinking about this. I can allow these thoughts and feelings to exist, and I can also create some new ideas. There's a capacity for new learning here. I can establish a different emotional response, a different way of thinking, and then most important, I can display a different behavior. So here's where we get back to taking action. I can feel anxious and I can move towards something that's difficult. I don't get rid of that feeling, right? Or maybe it declines a little bit, maybe becomes less frequent, less intense, but it doesn't go away entirely. I've learned that already. But I can learn a new way of understanding the challenge, a new emotional reaction, and I can learn new patterns of behavior that boost that self-efficacy, that indicate to me that, hey, I can handle this. I don't have to act on the anxiety. I can tolerate the emotion. I can be effective. I can work through this. I can live. So it's about new learning, right? It's not about eliminating the emotions. It's about learning something new so that you give yourself an opportunity to grow, to move, to improve, and to get on with your life. So we don't extinguish it, the emotions, but we do learn new things so that we can pivot and adjust and make things better.